Anthony asked me to give you an overview of the International GeoSample number, and basically I will provide as an introduction a bit of background why the CZOData infrastructure worries about the physical samples as well, and what we're going to be presenting. After my sort of more general introduction, Leslie Schul, who is at IEDA, at the Integrated Earth Data Applications Group, and Megan Carter, who is currently still at Pennsylvania State University, but who will soon be joining IEDA as well, will give you an overview of the systems that currently exist and how to use the capabilities there for sample registration and sample management. And I think then we should have a brief discussion that Anthony will probably lead on how the CZOData system and the CZO portal can be configured to ease sample registration for all this, the critical zone observatories who collect samples. So let me just start by actually introducing me. I think most of you probably don't know me. My name is Kerstin Lehnert, and I'm the director of a data facility named Integrated Earth Data Applications. It's a data facility that NSF funds with focus on the one. It has actually a lot of diversity in its data system. But one focus is on geochemical data and on sample data, the other being more on geophysical marine geology data, a lot of sensor-based data coming off the ships and from programs that are more marine-focused. And I've been involved with the geochemical and sample data systems for a long time. So let me start off with saying, and I wished I had more interactivity with all the people here online to find out how many of you are actually dealing with physical samples. I know that the Shale Hill CZO and clearly Anthony's CZO do collect quite a bit of samples, and I got a couple of slides here, a couple of photos of the CZO website to show that sample collection clearly is part of the observatories, and it is so across many other observatories that we have in the earth sciences, and also is clearly a big component of many of the disciplines within the earth sciences that do observations on samples to basically understand properties and processes in the earth. So the samples can in some way be regarded as the raw data from which other observational data is derived that eventually becomes digital. And the connection to the digital world from the physical samples is actually that when we're trying to analyze and reuse sample-based data, we need to have information about the samples. And what I mean with sample metadata is information about the time they were collected, the place the sample was collected, what the sample is, how it was treated, how it was processed, and so on. And an important piece of information usually is where is the sample now if somebody wants to reanalyze it or do whatever other type of analysis with it. But there is also a component of being able to verify research that has already been published. In order to do that, there should be access to a sample, and the access to the sample can only happen if there is a link between the digital data and the sample. And as I already mentioned, samples do get reanalyzed and reused for new purposes in science, and so the sharing of samples also requires that there is access online to sample information that can be searched, and there is a link to the physical sample so that there is access to the actual physical object. when we're trying to bring physical samples into digital data infrastructures, we have started to talk a bit about the Internet of Samples. And there are two, or actually three, fundamental requirements how we can link physical objects to digital data and digital infrastructure. And that is that A, samples need to be uniquely identified. We have big problems in the earth sciences with sample names that get duplicated, or sample names that change over time and don't allow us to really unambiguously connect data to a specific sample. And we need what I here call virtual representations of samples, and that is basically a set of information about the samples, that the sample metadata or a sample metadata profile, if you want to call it that way, that is accessible online. And the third requirement that I've listed here is that these unique identifiers need to be used in publications or in data systems when the data are reported. So I call that here actually citing samples in the literature. These unique identifiers then need to be able to link to the metadata records, and they also are fundamental for establishing interoperability between data systems that hold data for a specific sample. There are other actually considerations that are more sort of on the side of enhancing access, enhancing management of physical samples that through the use of cyber infrastructure, through the use of software tools and online capabilities. So for example, we can in these days build easily online catalogs, be they federated or centralized, that allow broad discovery and access of samples so they can be shared, to locate physical samples and to access the metadata, and I talked about that earlier. And all these aspects of interoperability, that we're now able to actually link data and samples and publications. And I will give you an example of that later on. And something that has absolutely not been possible before is linking data that are acquired on a single sample over a long time period in different labs. And it allows us to integrate sample-based data with other observational data, and that is I think, a critical aspect for the critical zone observatories. There is also currently efforts going on to build cyber infrastructure, a shared cyber infrastructure for collections and sample management that help repositories with managing collections, making them accessible, and that also advances a certain level of best practices for standard for sample sharing and sample documentation and citation and so on. So it is just kind of, if you have dealt with samples, you can imagine all the possibilities that are suddenly coming up. For example, being able to search across all publications for a specific sample and find all the data that was acquired on the sample and find it actually in a format that can then be easily integrated to immediately have access to information about where the sample is, who owns it, and contact that person, or search rather than for a specific sample, actually search for samples by specific properties. So that may be really relevant for any research projects that are being planned. So the two projects that I wanted to present to you is, on the one hand, the International Geosample Number, or IGSN, which is a globally unique and persistent identifier for physical objects that are collected or managed in the earth sciences. And the other one being geosamples, which is actually a component of the integrated Earth data applications, providing tools and services for users to register their samples with IGSNs, to manage sample metadata, make that accessible. GeoSamples makes or preserves, archives the sample metadata and provides access to these metadata. And as I mentioned, it provides services to register samples with IGSN. So the IGSN is actually a project that was funded now 10 years ago, its initial development by the National Science Foundation, because there was realization that really without unique identification, it was not possible to build interoperability for sample-based data and to integrate data from samples that have been acquired over a long time. And the IGSN actually has built a system and an architecture that guarantees these identifiers to be unique via a centralized control mechanism, and it has established the metadata profiles for samples or virtual sample representations that are managed at federated IGSN allocating agents, and I will come back a little bit to that architecture. You see here three different examples of samples that were registered with the IGSN system. You see here a rock. This is so what you can see here already is there is a sample name. The samples that get registered have a name that is meaningful for the investigator or the repositories, but they also carry this IGSN then. And any type of material can be registered. So we have a rock here, we have a soil, mineral, waters can be registered, or lots of other materials. And there is more metadata here that I will show you later. So just very briefly, I don't think we need to go into depth about the syntax of the IGSN, but it has a certain structure in starting off with a 3-digit user code, or as we say, a namespace, and then it has 6 digits, alphanumeric digits, a random string of characters that provides the identification. And the distribution of these namespaces is handled via a central registry that therefore ensures that these names are all unique. So each individual user gets their own unique user code and can then assign these 6 numbers to any of the samples they own. This is just to compare it. Somehow the IGSN works very similar to a social security number in that, you know, a sample can have a name just as a person can have a name. And then, by the way, this is not my social security number. It's just an invented one. And you have an IGSN the same way you have a social security number that is pretty meaningless in its or it doesn't have any content, any information encoded, but that is used in systems to really unambiguously link to the information about that sample. So what objects do get an IGSN? It's not only an individual specimen of rock or of a mineral and so on, but it starts off with actually some sort of super sample like a drill hole, a well, a soil pit, or a stratigraphic section and so on. And those can be parent objects. There are other parent objects like cores or dredges and so on. And then any sample that's taken from these locations or from parent objects gets its own IGSN. And those specimens are categorized by materials. They can be subdivided by physical appearance, such as a hand specimen, a thin section, and so on. The way the IGSN registration works is that once the user has a sample, and this can be in the field when it's right upon collection or when the sample gets into the lab, gets into the repository, they can submit metadata to an allocating agent. which currently is primarily in the US, the System for Earth Sample Registration, or GeoSamples, as I mentioned earlier. The allocating agent then creates an IGSN and stores the metadata, forwards the IGSN to the global registry, which is currently operated at the Geoforschungszentrum in Potsdam. So the IGSN gets registered there and checked for uniqueness. If the uniqueness is confirmed, that will be communicated back to the allocating agent, who then sends the number as a confirmed number to the user, and the user will then start to use the IGSN, be it on sample labels or in publications or in their data sets. So this is the overall architecture of the IGSN. As I mentioned, there is a central global registry that is operated at Potsdam, and the members of the IGSN organizations are the allocating agents who can set up their own registration services. The GFZ has been setting up their service, and CSIRO in Australia is in the process of doing that, and CSAR is doing that currently here in the US. And there are other institutions who will set up these services. So at the point of the allocating agents is where the metadata gets stored, where the services are provided to the user, the tools for registering, for metadata management, and so on, and all the allocating agents talk to the IGSN registry. So just to mention briefly, the membership that I mentioned is within an international organization called the IGSN EV. EV stands for Eingetragener Verein because it's registered in Germany. It's the German description of a non-profit society. And you need to be a member only if you want to set up an allocating agent. If you're just using IGSNs, you don't need to be a member. You can just use one of the allocating agents as your entry point to register your samples with IGSNs. We have different levels of metadata depending on which component of the IGSN architecture is basically referred to. The IGSN registry has only a minimum amount of metadata that are more administrative for managing the actual numbers. The important thing for you are the metadata that are hosted and managed at the allocating agent, and these can basically be customized to the particular types of samples that are handled by this allocating agent. And that's where I think we'll talk with all of you about the types of samples that the critical zone observatories generate, and if the current metadata that CSAR provides need to be modified to fulfill any requirements for critical zone observatory samples. We also intend to operate a global metadata store that has just a core set of metadata, including material type, including the sampling location and time, the distributor, and so on. And these metadata would be compliant with international standards such as ISO or OGC. The current metadata that GeoSamples or CSAR hosts relate to the identification of the sample, such as the sample name that's provided by or is given by the owner of the sample, a set of descriptive metadata such as material classification, potentially age and size, sort of sample attributes that relate to the actual management of the physical object. Geospatial information, clearly where was the sample collected, including a bit of the geological context, such as geologic units and so on. the process of collection, including specific field programs, platforms, such as if it was collected on a ship, on some drilling platform, and so on, date collector, and then the important information of where is the sample now, what's the access to the sample. What is important is that these metadata also include information about the relationship to other samples. And I can show you an example here. This is a core, as you see here. It's a core from the ocean drilling program. It has a parent, which is the hole from which this core was generated. There are multiple other cores that came from the same hole, so they're shown here as siblings. And then there are children, which are the core sections. So this shows you how there is a whole sample genealogy that links all the different pieces that have been taken from an initial field object. Application of the IGSN clearly in sample management. I've mentioned that already. Preservation and access to sample metadata can be ensured by using this unique identifier. It helps tracking the samples, and I'm showing here an example of a sample from the Global River Observatories. They have an archive or repository of samples at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. They're using the IGSN here and the QR code that is produced together with during the registration process, so they can track the samples. This can be easily read by any mobile phone or iPad and so on, and immediately show all the metadata that go along with the sample. The IGSN also makes it very easy to transfer sample ownership. The metadata can just be transferred to a new account in GeoSamples. In data management, the application is that you can unambiguously cite samples, find and access data in distributed data systems, and link data, samples, and publications. I talked about that before. But I wanted to show you an example here, which is actually a publication from one of the critical zone observatories. You have a data table in this particular publication, and the IGSNs are listed in the data table, and they are active links to the metadata at geosamples.org. So when you click in the data table of the online article, you get immediately to the full information about that particular sample. The vision is that in the future, this would allow us also to have basically clicks or buttons where you can click on and say, please check the literature if there is any other article that holds data for this sample. Okay, and with this, maybe we should take a quick break and see if there are any questions. Maybe Leslie can tell me if questions are handled actually through the chat or if they handled via audio.
I don't see any questions have come up on the chat, but if they do, we'll be sure to get to them. Anthony, okay. I don't know how you usually do this.
So people can type in, there's nothing there now, please feel free to, and we'll bump that up, but also you can unmute yourself and speak up anytime. Really, we want these to be more as discussion-like as possible.
Okay, good. So then I basically hand over to Leslie, so the screen will have to be moved, I guess, so she can demo. I'm not sure who is going to do it, Megan or Leslie.
Okay, I can do the demo, and Anthony, since you are logged on now, I think I can no longer move the presenter around. So if you could move it to the Leslie sheet. All right, So I will resume on the slides. So I'm just going to show a few more slides of some of the highlights of the CSAR system, and then depending how much time we have, probably just 10 minutes or so total, I'll go to the actual website and show you where to find everything. So first here is, if you go to geosamples.org and you sign in with GeoPass, which is our single sign-on for CSAR and other AIDA tools, you will get to the dashboard, which is what you see here. So on the dashboard, there are several tabs for different actions you might want to take with your samples, and also many just quick links on the front page. So the main things you would probably want to do are register new samples, edit or group your samples, or maybe make some changes to your account. We tried to make the registration process as easy as possible. So what you see here is the batch registration template creator. The batch template will allow you to register hundreds or even thousands of samples at one time. We do also have the option to register samples individually on a web form. Maybe if you're just testing things out, you can use that first. But most users use the batch template because it is much easier to get information into the system. There's a screenshot here of an empty batch template with different fields that are filled in, and every time you download a template, it comes with this quick guide that has examples of what are the best practices or links if there happen to be a controlled vocabulary for that field. Not too many of the fields have controlled vocabularies, but of course, in order to properly search the system, we did impose some controlled vocabularies on a few of them, such as the classification of rocks and minerals, and also navigation. So there are a number of metadata fields that you see here, and I guess one thing you might think about is later in this webinar, we want to know which fields are missing for your CZOData. As another note, we are developing a mobile app for sample registration, because a lot of users go out into the field and they want to get this identifier right away before they start labeling it and maybe splitting it to different people in the field. If you would like to be a beta tester for this mobile app, please do just contact us. You could contact us at info@geosamples.org. We're trying to improve it so it's more user-friendly. But of course, the benefit of this is your phone will have geolocation automatically. So you can register a sample there and have some of the information go in automatically.
Leslie and Kerstin, a question about accounts and setting up accounts. How do individual versus institutional accounts work, and what would you recommend is the right way to go in terms of getting people registered?
I can give an initial answer, and Kerstin can chime in if she wants to add to it. With the CZO, this is a little bit of a different case, but most of our users right now, they're either individual researchers or, as you said, like maybe a curator of a collection of like a core lab or something. I think it would depend on the project if they want to share this workspace. We are working on getting more functionality to share between users, but currently each sign-on, we don't have that sharing capability yet. So if you do plan on sharing, for example, I'll show you some of the samples from the Shale Hills CZO, and they have a shared account for their official CZO samples.
Yeah, there's also, I should add that this architecture that we have been setting up for multiple allocating agents has triggered some discussions about changing the syntax of the IGSN in allowing sort of more high-level allocation of short namespaces for organizations. So CZOs, for example, could have a CZ and then subdomains for individuals or for individual institutions. So that will give some level of shared IGSNs, but individual-based management of the samples. And as Leslie said, we are in the process of building up shared spaces, but that, at the moment, it is really up to the institution or the researchers to decide if they want their own account or if the institution prefers to have a shared account.
Great, thanks.
Okay, yes, ask questions at any time. So some other things you might want to do once you get a number of samples into your account, you can create sample groups, and reasons for creating groups might be you want to put all the samples from one publication into a group so you can have one URL to get to all of them quickly. Or maybe you had an award funded one of the CZOs and you want to put all the samples from that CZO into a group so you can get to it from one URL. And any feedback on new features you would like or new group types for this grouping functionality, we are open to. As Kerstin mentioned before, you can transfer ownership of metadata. So this would be very useful, for example, if somebody has a large collection and maybe they are about to retire and they know they're not going to be logging into CSAR very much, but they can make their entire collection show up in somebody else's user space. So the other person can now curate them and add any information to those samples.
A question just got typed in. Can a sample be used in multiple groups? Can you multi-group cross-reference samples?
Yep, no problem. So the next thing here is, in addition to that list of metadata fields, there's also extended metadata that can be attached to a sample profile. These include images, documents like reports or Excel spreadsheets. You can link to references, either directly with the DOI link or a URL link. And basically, it is very flexible. So you can link to these other types of information about the sample.
I would just add here that one new development that we're planning is, which is of high relevance, is to establish the link to data in external data systems. So if any data for that sample sits in the critical zone chemistry database, CZChemDB, or at some other part of the CZO data system, then we would basically link directly from this metadata record out to the data. And that we hope to establish in an automated way, finding out from basically through harvesting procedures if data is available for a specific IGSN or for a specific sample at an external data system that has established these links with us.
Yes, that's a great point. And in addition to linking to actual data, if you want to link back to your project homepage to drive more traffic there so people can learn more about the rest of the project. That is another thing that can very easily be done. I think this is the last slide, just highlighting that we're trying to build tools around this sample registry that will help people who manage samples. And one of them is this label printing, which if you use the standard label sheet, you can create a PDF to print on that. And it includes a QR code that will go directly to the URL of the sample profile. And we just recently added the flexibility to choose which fields you want to have on those labels. Okay, so
do you have a slide? You don't have a slide about the mobile app, right?
There is, yes. We had a slide about the mobile app. And I said if they want to test it, they should get in touch with us.
Oh, okay.
All right, so the time is 40 past. Let me just try to quickly show you a couple more things. So I'm not sure what is showing right now.
It's showing the AIDA homepage.
Okay.
No, CZOData homepage, sorry.
Okay. So this is the CZOData homepage at geosamples.org, and just to highlight a couple things, if you do not have an account and you want to get one, you would click here for new user. That will prompt you to get a GeoPass account. And if you do have an account, you would enter here, log into my CZOData. And here's my dashboard. So the other thing that I just wanted to make sure that I showed was the example of a filled out batch registration template. So I have a couple examples from the Shale Hills project. So Megan Carter and others have done a really great job just getting a lot of samples into the system. And they worked with us to make sure that if there are any questions, and I can show you that in one of these templates, if there's a question of where to put things, we will figure out where it's best to go and then try to include that in the future. So I'm not sure how large the text is on your screen, but this is an example of a terrestrial section of soil, and it can be, this is the batch registration template. You can specify the parent of these new samples that are being registered. And this just gives you an example of what the different fields are that were filled in. And I wanted to show one other one. Here we have some biology samples that also are connected to some parent samples. And I think this is the one where they really wanted to use the Pennsylvania State Plane Coordinate System because that's what the users are used to seeing. So since we need to have a latitude and longitude, our solution for this was to put in the lat-lon, but then also make sure that this information that the users want to see is available to them. And improving this geocoordinate, the way we deal with geocoordinates is something on our list. So I don't want to take up too much more time. Anthony, I'm not sure if you want to start a discussion about something else now. I could show more, but.
Sure. I guess what I'll say is just kind of a very high-level overview of where we want to go with this for the CZO community. It's clear that the CZO community is one in which we will be and already are sharing specimens or samples with each other within our CZOs and increasingly, I think, over time between CZOs. And when that happens, be prepared for data management nightmares if we don't adopt something along these lines, right? For you know, even for relatively small teams, it's really hard to keep track of all the metadata related to a sample and unambiguously keep track of where samples came from, et cetera, you know, within one research group. But the whole point of the CZO is to really get beyond that single research group. And so that's the use case here, right? We're not saying, oh, every single specimen, every single bottle of water that you pull out of the stream needs to get an IGSN attached to it. But I think, and I think we as a data team think that any time you're sharing samples, getting an IGSN is really smart. Right now, as you can see from the use cases that were just shown, that Shale Hills has really taken this on. I think Sue Brantley deserves a lot of appreciation or kudos for jumping right in and starting to use geosamples numbers in a big way, and there are the benefits that you just saw. To do so, sometimes, as you saw in the one example about, you know, Pennsylvania State Plain, you kind of have to, you know, cram a few square pegs in the round holes. With some of it, it has to do with the naming of samples or the type, I should say, actually the type of sample names that are possible and other things like that. So in the proposal for CZOData, there is a task to create essentially a custom service of some sort, or profile for the CZO community, which could be the leaders for, you know, Earth surface community in general. So we're not exactly sure, when I say we, the greater CZOData team, but also specifically AIDA's group, exactly how we're going to move forward with that. But it's pretty clear that we'll be looking for your input and feedback on specific kind of CZ-specific vocabularies for sample types and other things. And we may even go beyond that so that we can create, you know, maybe not a custom service, maybe we'll just sit on top of CSTAR, but at least some custom fields to choose from, and then also some recommendations on how we might want to use namespaces, for example, so that we can be somewhat unified. As Leslie pointed out, you know, maybe we all choose CZ as the first two letters, and then two more letters for the actual which observatory, and maybe one letter for a user. I'm not really sure what will happen there. So there is some customization or some features that we want to provide to you, and we're just as we've discussed in previous cyber seminars. Our focus was so much on the observations data model 2, ODM 2, and understanding kind of the structures that we want to mimic and the vocabularies we want to create, that we put these other tasks on hold. But now we're ready to roll, and we're interested in engaging you all in this. But just like with some of these other things, it doesn't mean you have to hold back. You could get started right now. So I don't know if that's a little bit, if that's useful to hear. Kerstin, Leslie, do you want to add anything else? Maybe talk about what you could provide now?
I really think that the process of gathering requirements from all the different CZOs on, you know, the sample types that they handle, the sample metadata that they need, will help geosamples tremendously in building better user services. So I'm really looking forward to get as much feedback as possible from this group, because we have direct applications.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we're getting a few questions online. Leslie's answered one of them online. You want to repeat your answer, Leslie?
Yes, no problem. The question was, if a daughter has multiple parents, how do we link that type of relationship? And that's something that we had not come across for a very long time until recently. And I guess this comes up in soil samples when a sample is made from 2 different samples or something like that. So my answer was that since this is somewhat new, for a situation like this, what we like to do is talk directly to the investigator that has these samples so we can work out a solution. Because currently, one parent can have as many children and children of children, and that can keep going on that way, but we haven't figured out what is the solution to this multiple parent issue yet. So yes, Nikki, we should get in touch by email after this call.
All right. What is your recommendation specifically, Kerstin, if people really want to get started right away? And it might be useful for people to have experience with CSAR right away so that they can then be better informed about how to create some CZ-specific features or CZ-tuned features. So any recommendations there on how folks can dive in now?
I mean, if it's just a matter of trying things out, we could set up a test account for anybody to just register a few samples, try the process out. We had such a test account as a guest a while ago, but people are welcome to register an account. We can, if later the institution decides that those samples should be managed under a different account, we can always do a transfer of ownership to different accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And I clearly see the need. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of reviewing and revising the IGSN syntax. And one of the reasons is that if we continue to hand out 3-digit namespaces to every investigator, we might actually at some point be running out of it. And each one of these numbers currently actually comes with 2.5 billion numbers. So each namespace could register 2.5 billion samples, and nobody will really do that unless it's a big program like the ocean drilling or similar activities. And so we think that basically providing namespaces that can be subdivided for larger programs. Sorry.
Doesn't sound so bad to us, but it might be hard for you to concentrate. Kerstin is in an airport, by the way.
Yeah, so I see my airplane just arriving actually from the window, so I'm going to have to get down to the gate anyway very soon. But anyway, I mean, as I mentioned, the new syntax that will come up will be more flexible to accommodate, institutions and large programs, and also be a little more conservative with the amount of numbers that we're providing to people. But for now, I think, you can just start registering. We can take those namespaces back once there is a decision that your institution would like to work with a different syntax structure. So at this point, I think if trying it out, is a good idea, I would encourage people to just register an account and go ahead. But the approach that Shale Hill has taken in using one namespace for the observatory, for that specific observatory, is one approach. Okay, but for now, I'm just going to say bye. I'm sure that the discussion will go on, and hopefully there's obviously going to be some sort of face-to-face meeting of the data managers that we can discuss this further.
All right. Thank you very much, Kerstin.
All right. Well, thank you all for your attention, and talk to you soon.
Super.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Well, I think it makes sense to wrap this up relatively soon, but I would like to just hear if there are any other questions, and then just make a few announcements about what's next and what might be in your inboxes or a few other things. Before we move on to that, are there any more questions about IGSNs and how we might want to get started?
I can say one more thing. Of course, I always forget to say things, but on my screen here, you can see there's an orange feedback tab on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you click that, you'll actually be able to get to a list of things that other people have requested from CSAR. And it might be a little bit weird because this is actually a larger list that includes more than CSAR, but when it's CSAR specific, it will usually say it in the title. So this is one place you can go to see what others have requested, and you can add requests of your own. So please use that. We love hearing from people.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, do you want to describe, Jennifer Williams from Shale Hills, do you want to describe how you guys have been managing IGSN, or maybe Megan, I guess both of you have been doing it.
It's up to you, Megan. Do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to?
I think you can go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, well, Sue is the PI of our CZO, and we started initially registering these individual samples, and so after discussion with Leslie and Kerstin about using CSAR, we decided for us, since the beginning of the IGSN would have 3 alpha characters, that we would use Sue's initials SLP for her private samples that come from a variety of projects, and anything related to Shale Hills would go with the SSH because that's the beginning of our CZO. Kerstin suggested that we not go with the CZO type acronym, mainly because at the time there were 6, and of course now there are 10, and moving forward there might eventually be many more.
Mm-hmm. So do other people in your CZO essentially ask you and Megan to register samples, or has it grown beyond that? So have you been all coordinated about it?
We are increasing our coordination about that. We have extended the registration from strictly soil cores to, as you saw, biological, which have been acquired not only within Sue's group, but at some of the other PIs. We are currently registering samples that are archived. So any samples that are not archived have not been registered, and that's where we're upscaling now.
Do you think you will register samples that aren't archived, that are just getting split up and sent to different labs to be analyzed and disposed of, or not?
So Leslie and Kirsty could certainly explain this better. However, when we were working out the procedure for how many, from a parent to a daughter to a daughter's daughter, and as they indicated, there could be as many grandchildren and great-grandchildren are necessary, ideally you have to have some sort of sample to have registered. And so any sample, which would be a subsample, if it consumed everything, it would not need to be registered. But I have colleagues at other institutions that have requested samples that we have given them, all homogenized or not, and they do not leave our lab without that IGSN on it.
Right, because you don't know if they're going to consume every last bit, right?
And they may consume everything that we provided to them, and they may not. But we ask when they receive the sample and proceed with their analyses, that they will publish their data as did Ashley, that you could view in the presentation earlier, so in her manuscript was, so that publicly it's all on record and traceable.
That's great. That makes tons of sense. It's cool that you already have experience with doing it. Hopefully you inspire others, because I think that's exactly what you just described is exactly the kind of criteria that I think makes sense for all the CZOs, right? If you archive it, you give it an IGSN. If you mail it out of your lab, you give it an IGSN. If there's any chance that any of it's going to survive for longer than a single analysis.
Exactly.
Cool. Any questions from anybody, to Jennifer or anyone else? All right. I will then wrap this up. Last night, I finally sat down and sent out a bunch of emails that have been in my brain but not out of my fingertips for quite a while, including the kind of dates that we're circling in on for a face-to-face meeting. And those are the end of the week right after Memorial Day, so the 28th to the 30th of May. It's outside of that doodle poll that I sent you all about a month ago. It's outside of that range, but unfortunately the best week, the best time period in that doodle poll was the very last week, and it didn't work very well for our team. And the following week is the Joint Aquatic Sciences meeting, and then but as far as we could tell, there was no major thing going on the week of Memorial Day, near the end of the week. So we'd like to settle on that, but if there are any major objections, we want to hear them right away, or even minor objections. It'd be interesting to know. Does that all seem reasonable to anyone, or do you want to all wait? I guess here's a question. Should we wait a bit further to make sure that those dates work, or should we just go with it? All right, I'm not hearing anything. Maybe someone will type. So I think those dates are going to harden by tomorrow or so, unless we hear anything. The second question is, in that email I sent out, there was really kind of a day and a half of agenda items. People flew in on a Wednesday evening. Maybe everyone could have dinner, or a good part of the people could have dinner, get to know each other. That's an important goal here, because we want all of you to share your experiences with each other, just like Jennifer has this experience. There are others within the group that have experiences, and we found that to be quite powerful every time we did it. So then we have a whole full day, and then half of a second day. If we adjourn here at around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. or so, anybody can get to almost anywhere in the country, at least in the continental U.S., by the end of that day, if we adjourn at 2 p.m., because we're so close to some big airports. The question is a day and a half or a day and 2/3 enough, or should we extend it an additional day? By extending an additional day, we could really increase the ability to share and maybe resolve some of these bigger issues. On the flip side, unlike our last IMC meeting, where we were doing a lot of these presentations, introducing you all to a lot of the concepts, hopefully these member seminars will get a lot of that out of the way. So coming up, it will mostly be exchanged between all of you, and more discussions between everybody at the table. So anyways, I want to get some feedback on that too. So you can either type in right now or email. All right, silence. So last item, that we do not have any cyber seminars scheduled for the next 2 weeks for various scheduling reasons, but we have some ideas for after that. But we kind of think this is a useful forum, and we have some ideas that we've written about. I think 2 possibilities that we put on the agenda or on the seminar website, and a couple ideas that we haven't put up there yet. but we're interested in input from you all as to what additional types of seminars we might have. I mean, there are ideas, for example, some of us are playing around with using, you know, IPython notebooks and some Python libraries to analyze data directly from Water OneFlow web services, kind of like combining the power of, you know, MATLAB or R, but right straight, you know, with Hydro Desktop, but right from a command line or from simple scripts. We played around with some of that. It might be fun to show you. How to use GitHub for collaboration, you know, is something else that we've all learned how to do here that might be of interest to all of you. So there's a bunch that we could present, and we're interested in doing that. So send us ideas or pipe in. All right. Well, thank you all, and we will we'll be in touch. We'll hear from you hopefully soon, and we'll have another one of these in 3 weeks. Thank you all. All right.